What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Before we get into today's conversation with Kaya, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. Number one, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider leaving a rating and a review. The more positive ratings and reviews you get, the more it helps new people find the show, and it really helps to grow the community we're developing here. And if you're one of those people that have recently found the podcast, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. I put out brand new interviews every single Monday and a brand new takeaways episode every single Thursday, where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it to your Instagram story. Tag myself at the Jacob Kelly, tag Kaya at Kaya_here, and I'll feature you on my account and send you a message as well. And now, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Kaya. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan, and today we are joined by Jose Cayasso. Kaya is the CEO and co-founder of Slidebean, an AI-powered online presentation tool helping users create powerful presentations with just a few clicks. I first found Caya and Slidebean through their awesome content marketing that they're producing on YouTube. I'm very excited to have him here on the podcast today to talk about that content marketing, his company, and his life. Kaya, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, man.
My pleasure. I'm very excited to have you here. Where I want to start today, I want to go all the way back to the beginning. And from my understanding, I couldn't confirm this 100%, but was your dad Juan Cayasso, like the famous football player from Costa Rica?
That's right. That's the one.
I don't want to dive specifically into him, but I'm just curious as to how that impacts you growing up. Because from my understanding, you probably moved around a little bit. Like, how does that impact you growing up?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So my dad, we're a tiny country, Costa Rica. Yeah, but my dad used to play professional soccer. He's a bit of a well-known character down here, mostly because in Italy '90, which was the first time our team went to the World Cup, he scored the first goal. So it's like a hugely remembered thing. Yeah, man, I suck at soccer. It took me a few years to sort of come to terms with that, because as a kid and my dad's still playing professionally, I was expected to be the center of the team, and none of that talent was passed down the chain. So no, I don't play soccer. So I had to deal with as a kid. I had to deal with the fact that I was more of a geek than an athlete, and sort of come to terms with that. I think it was in my teenage years when I finally said, like, okay, no, like this is not going to work. I have to, like, sort of embrace this thing that I'm good at.
As to talk to me a little bit more about the thing that you're good at, because from my understanding, growing up, you weren't planning on necessarily becoming an entrepreneur. You were kind of more leaning towards becoming a coder or something like that, right?
Yeah. So I did. Man, good background research you did. Yeah. So I wanted to study. I went to college, and the first career I took was computer science, which was useful because in the end, I don't think I sucked at it. I just didn't really like it. Part that I didn't like was that it was just too much focused on the back end stuff and the programming stuff, and I was more of a design oriented mind. I realized then. So luckily, I was able to change that, and I switch careers, and eventually moved to digital animation, which is, it's geek, it's computers, but more around the design, right? And then the outcome of if you've been working 1 month on a project, on in computer science, what you have is a really shitty interface with that does something, and you know how complex it is in the background. But on the other side, you had some nice illustrations, some character design, maybe some animations, and that was something that you better to show, I guess. So that was one of the first reasons why I switched.
Yeah. And then from my understanding, after you switched over, the big project you worked on was Lupio, correct?
Yeah, so I did one little short film, which I'm still pretty proud of. Like, third year student. It was a decent production. I still watch it today, and it's okay. I did a bunch of others that I don't brag about.
hmm And then your first kind of foray into entrepreneurship came with the classified site, right?
Yeah, so I tried to, like, all through this time I was working. So I was working and studying at the same time. I was working at Intel. I was a tech support agent, but it was making some decent money and paying for school and some beers. Yeah, but I started to realize that I could come up with this stuff. Like I started to see like problems that I identified and that kind of needed solving. I was like growing up in Costa Rica, the startup scene was not a thing. I think that even Social Network, the movie, The Social Network was sort of like the first like, oh, this is how startups work. Like you can raise capital, and like for a lot of us, I probably myself included, like this was the first glimpse of that world, which was very external to us. There's a small startup scene now, but it took a while. At least startups in the way they're known in the U.S. So when we started that company, myself and a couple of coworkers, we did all the mistakes in the book. We none of us coded really. So we had to hire somebody, and it was an outsourced via Upwork. All the mistakes in the book. Hopefully, luckily, we didn't spend a lot of money on that. But it was a first, like the first experience in like, how do you buy a website? How do you make your emails? How do you launch something? How do you build a social Facebook page? And and that sort of those experiences kind of piled up into the next ones that did a little better.
And so let's talk about some of those next ones, because the one right after that, I believe, was Potatos, right?
Yeah, so, yeah, potatoes or potatoes. It depends
Potato.
on where you are in the world. Play on words, so it's just potatoes, and you can toss them. It was a mobile game. We did a Kickstarter campaign for that, so that was me kind of like dipping my feet into how this worked. Like Kickstarter was, I think, a great idea. Kickstarter for a lot of companies, a lot of projects, Kickstarter is a validation tool, right? More than it's a pre-sales thing, because if you're building a hardware product, you can pre-sell it. People will buy it in advance, and then you have money to go and produce it. So that's great about Kickstarter for hardware stuff. But also, it's a validation. If people are willing to give you money for this, then that means that it makes kind of some sense. So the story with Kickstarter is funny because I'm still an outsider to this entrepreneurial world. We do a decent video because I'm an animator. Um, some concepts about the game. I didn't understand. No, I hadn't read the Lean Startup or any of this material. I just figured that we could do a video, pretend that like the game was almost ready, and see what would happen. Luckily, that was like in line with what you should do as a lean company, kind of see how people react. And by an extreme sheer luck, Josh Constantine from TechCrunch picked up the project. I think that Philippe, my co-founder, he like did a submit a tip on TechCrunch. Like you would swear that thing does not work, but it's only worked for this time. And I remember Josh called me because my phone number was the one like on the application or something. He says, "Hey, I'm Josh Constantine from TechCrunch. I saw your story. I'm going to publish a story about it." Blah, blah, blah. And like, from what? Can you spell TechCrunch? Literally, I asked him, "Can you spell TechCrunch?" Because I had never heard of TechCrunch. So yeah, like that sort of boosted that crazy, because we started getting emails from if you're in TechCrunch, it is assumed that you are a tech startup. So some investors started emailing us, some accelerators, and then we started getting some credibility, and we had to sort of catch up really quickly on how this stuff worked, because we were getting these leads coming in. Yeah.
And so you mentioned featured in TechCrunch. I believe you were featured in CNN as well. You guys were dubbed the next Angry Birds. And so you have all these massive media outlets featuring you, investors calling you. You're having a huge praise by being named the next Angry Birds. So does that add pressure? Because all of a sudden you just went from this small startup in Costa Rica to being featured, I don't want to say on a global stage, but at least on an international stage with a lot of people looking to you as the next big thing. Does that add pressure to what you're
Yeah,
doing?
that's super weird. It was super weird. Um, Crazy stuff that happened. Like the actual guys from Rovio emailed us, and they offered to buy us out. They offered to acquire us, which was more, not even an app. Like we weren't even a corporation. We had nothing. We had just this idea, right? So they wanted to buy us out, which that's the way they phrased it. In reality, they just wanted to offer us a job and just save the trouble of having a competitor. And then just earn our IP, which was not a bad idea. I could have taken that deal, and I probably would have. It wouldn't have been so bad, I guess. Yeah, we had some crazy emails. A company called Pocket Gems. I don't know if they still exist. They made like little mobile games back at the time. This is 2012, so it was early mobile gaming in the App Store. Yeah, they emailed us as well. They offered us to acquire us. I think something like that. They wanted to prove that we could really code something, so that we had like a paid test or some stuff like that. But we flew to San Francisco for that meeting, and again, it was us just kind of like crash course, massive crash course on what this meant. We didn't end up taking any of those deals. We actually went on and kind of pursued the company, which again, it wasn't the best idea from a revenue, from a making money standpoint, because we were really rookies in this, and we were destined to fail, if you will. We just didn't know that. But then, by going through with it, by learning and failing, we learned a lot. We did Dream Adventures as an accelerator, which was this massive crash course on a lot of the stuff I talk about on YouTube, and a lot of stuff that we sort of evangelize uh, to our customers. Like, I wouldn't have started Slidebean if it hadn't been for that experience, because that's where I learned most of the stuff.
It's probably one of those situations where you don't realize it, but you can connect the dots looking backwards of how all the experience you got then benefits you now. And
Yeah,
I'm curious in terms of one of the things that might have connected looking back is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you met Nos daily at your first run through Dream Adventures, right?
that's true. Yeah.
So did he
Uh,
kind of impact the way you look at content? And does that kind of affect how you guys approach content today with Slidebean?
it did, man. That's some great questions and some good memories you bring. Yeah. So Naz was part of that class. He was I think it was his first year at Harvard. He was doing a company called Branchly, I think, which was about connecting people, karma around connecting people, something like that. Company didn't work out. He did the right choice of, like, he did the accelerator in the summer, and then he went back to school, which was the right choice. But yeah, we met. Nas was, so I think it was like 17, 18 or 19 back then. So remember, we went out drinking and he couldn't get into bars because he was underage. Um, we randomly kept in touch because we shared an office for a few months, and that's when, and soon after, he started this Nas Daily thing. Great concept. I remember I watched this as a friend that shared his stuff on Facebook. I would watch this content. And I'm like, well, he's onto something. One thing we did is, again, before any Nas Daily stuff blew up, we actually flew him to Costa Rica. I called him up and I said, hey man, let's do an episode on. I'll fly you to Costa Rica. You'll have a week worth of content from Costa Rica, so you can fly for free. You can stay at my apartment. You'll have content to brag about. But do one episode about us. We'll do that. And he was okay with that. Again, Nas Daily was such a small thing that was a fine deal for him. Um, yeah, and I think it was 2 3 months after he came over that one of his videos really blew up. I think it was a Thailand video. And after that, if you've seen Nas Daily, you know the rest of the story.
hmm And so you mentioned how at the time the Costa Rican startup scene wasn't really anything at the time. You were kind of essentially paving the way for Costa Rican startups. And I know you were named 40 under 40. You were doing TED Talks as well. Like, you started to gain a little bit of notoriety for the work you were doing. And then you said, though, that ultimately Potatoes was destined to fail. And I've heard you talk about in previous podcasts how failure isn't as well accepted in Costa Rica as in the US. Like, in the US, it's almost glorified to some extent. So how hard of that a thing was when you realized that the company was failing? I heard you say that you almost didn't tell anyone for an extended period of time because you didn't want to let anyone know that the company was going under. Like, talk to me about that time when you knew the company was going down and you knew it was time to move on, but you almost felt like you could.
Yeah, that's a great question again. So yeah, like, I don't want to say that we paved the way. I think there were some fantastic entrepreneurs way long before me. The difference is we were one of the first, um, at least sexy on paper, or like tech startup-y, or like Silicon Valley moving to the US type of company, right? Like this new sexy generation of tech startups, right? That everybody's excited about, the Facebooks and the Tinders and whatnot. We were kind of like the first company that were able, at least that were able to position themselves as that. There are much larger companies started by Costa Ricans in the tech space than mine. It was just the first one. Mobile app, iPhone was first 5 years in the iPhone, right? So yes, it sucked when we kind of realized that we were not really making money. Then we didn't raise money. Like, I think that the problem was that on this journey, like, I guess that the biggest mistake we made was thinking that by having all this credibility, this backstory, the TechCrunch stuff, the Dream stuff, that we were going to raise money to continue building the company. And we didn't, because we didn't have a lot of traction. The game was doing okay, but not insane engagement. So it was not worth an investment for anyone. So we ran out of money. I actually had to, in this crazy notion that we could still fund the company, I started paying a bunch of stuff with my credit cards, just because, um, it was, I was under the assumption that we would eventually raise money and then be covered. So when I was like $15,000 under in my credit cards, no salary, no money, we realized, like, well, I think that this is it. Like, we don't have any decent leads to raise money. I think we're gonna have to close it down. But what we decided was to, keep playing that card, like keep playing the card that the app is alive. In the end, it didn't really cost anything to keep the app on the App Store. Keep that card going while we came up with something else. And that something was Slidebean. And that I think is the worst place to start a company, in debt, with pressure to come up with something. Like it's a bad moment. Uh, we got a little lucky that the Slidebean idea wasn't too bad, and then it kind of worked out.
Mhm. Talk to me about, I do want to get to sliding, but before that, talk to me about what's going through your mind that last week at Dream Adventures, where you actually end up moving out of your apartment and crashing on the couch at the accelerator. What's kind of going through your mind at that point in time?
uh, where is that? Where is that story? Did I talk about that on YouTube?
I honestly can't remember where I found that story, for being completely
That's funny. I
honest.
don't think the Dreamer people know about this. Yeah. So what I did was, we were already broke. I was already on in some debt on the credit cards. Accelerator program's over. We have to move out of the office. No, most people move out of the office. We still have the office for about a month. So what I did is I had to find a new place to stay, but New York was so expensive. It was all cash. I couldn't pay with my credit card. So I was looking for a decent and really, really cheap place to stay. And in the meantime, there was this week where I had found a place, but it was open until a week later. And then, yeah, what I did is I stayed working late. And then around midnight, when everybody left, I would go and crash at the couch, wake up at 6 a.m. or so, go to the gym. I paid a membership to the gym across the street. And then I would go to our routine, take a shower, and then come back with my backpack, like clean. But I was really living at the office. I don't think the Dreamers people know this. But like we were still on that at that time, we were still in that hype of, hey man, we have a company, we moved to New York. So I wasn't really as depressed as I should have been on the situation, I guess.
Yeah. And then so Slidebean, correct me if I'm wrong, but how Slidebean came to be was a combination of different things. But two of the primary reasons was, one, you spent hours during your time at Dreamit just working on different slide decks and pitch decks. And two, it was when you gave your TEDx talk and you saw some of these professional speakers having people need to work on their decks for them. And so you knew there was an opportunity there to kind of innovate in the slide deck space. And so why was that the right idea at that time?
Yeah. So with pitch decks, and in the end, we ended up landing in pitch decks, right? That's what we do today. But with potatoes on the accelerator, I had to pitch all the time, twice a day on the investors that came in. So my and potatoes was all about design. So the pitch deck had to be really good because it had to reflect sort of what the game would look like. So I would spend hours on Keynote building these decks. And I didn't think much of it. Like the other guys had good decks, but ours stood out. We got some recognition about that. Then with TEDx, which was, it's funny because TEDx was, I think, around May, and we had just kind of realized that we were giving up on potatoes and we were just out of business. But I had to, I was invited to speak at a TEDx 3 months before on this company that was doing great. But anyway, like yeah, one thing I discovered is like they had an agency hired to tweak and redesign and beautify the presentations that the keynote speakers would do. And then in the rehearsals, a lot of the presentations were really, really bad. The design, at least on the design part. So that's where we sort of sparked that, that combined with my two co-founders for Slidebean, Vini and Jose, who had sort of seen this problem in their own worlds as well. So we all sat down, when we sat down and kind of officially started the company, I guess, threw in a bunch of ideas. Hey, these are problems that we've identified. Can we make money out of any of these? And then presentation stood out because it was this one that we all had experienced before.
Mhm. And so you mentioned how with Potatoes, you were able to validate the idea with Kickstarter, and then of course it got picked up by the media. So how did you go about validating Slidebean in the beginning?
Yeah. So by this time, I had read the Lean Startup, and then one idea, what inspired us for that one was Dropbox. So the Dropbox idea, the Dropbox approach was, how do you validate Dropbox in a lean way without building Dropbox, right? So what these, because you have to build for Dropbox to offer its value proposition, you have to have a Mac app and an Apple app and a iOS version and a web version. So you have to have everything built for Dropbox to make sense because the value proposition is having your files anywhere. So how do you validate that without building it? And what they, it would take months or years. So what they did is they made a video. They made a video telling people how Dropbox would work, and they put that video out there, and it went, people went nuts about it. So we did something similar. Didn't come up with this. We just copied it, I guess. We did a landing page. We did a nice digital animated video. I remember I made that. Took me about a couple of weeks, and it was all spoken on the in the past, right? This is how Slidebean works. We developed these features to help you with this. Sign up for free here, but there was nothing built in the background. There was nothing, just a sign up box. But that would allow us to validate, see how it was our own Kickstarter for Slidebean, right? See how people react, pay some ads, put some people through the landing page and see how they reacted. And the reaction was good. It sort of did provide that initial validation.
Mhm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at the time when you started Slidebean, you were working a job at the same time, right? And Slidebean was kind of the side project.
Yeah, so like again, like we were going under potatoes, but we had some built some credibility. So we started doing some consulting. We did some development consulting, built a couple websites for people, some social media stuff. Back then, social media was so different. You could still, position like there was still a value in coming up with creative content on Facebook. I don't think that exists anymore. Um, so yeah, people would pay us some decent, not some okay consulting fees to take care of that. So we made some money from that, which allowed me to start paying my credit cards to live and survive, and then also to start flight paying.
And so where I was going with that question was, from my understanding too, you became a dad in the early days of Slidebean. So how do you find it within yourself? One, so now you've have this family you're starting, you're still paying off credit card debt, you're starting to get some good money coming in from the consulting, but you still elect that the risky startup is the avenue for you. And I'm curious why that was your choice.
Um, yeah, man, like becoming a dad at that point is not a great decision. I have to say that it did sort of happen, um, but yeah, like it was a critical inflection point in the company, uh, for myself and my co-founders, because suddenly I have to be more responsible. Like if I would have um, if if I would have gotten pregnant 6 months earlier, I would have quit Slidebean and go find a real job. Um, but that difference in 6 months was enough for Slidebean to be at a stage where we were almost about to make it. Like we were almost there. Um, we were in startup Chile. We had just been accepted into 500 startups, I think. We knew there was some money coming in. There was at least a few months worth of salary. Product was launched. We had some users, and there was some activity going on. So there was enough to say, like to agree. And I had this conversation with her. Like, give me 6 months. Like, give me 6 months to see if this works out. If it doesn't, I'll find a real job. Um, and in those 6 months, which I worked the hardest I've ever worked, we brought it through. We raised our first round. We launched. We started generating some decent growth in revenue, and suddenly, like there was some stability enough to say, okay, so let's keep going. Let's keep going. But it was truly a 6 month difference, maybe less. That where it would have been too risky for me to keep going, and I would have found another job.
This is a bit of a random side question, but I found an old photo of you at Easter Islands in 2014 with a poster trying to get in front of Josh Constantine again. I'm curious if that worked.
It did. It did. I don't think Josh covered us that time, but someone else did. I think it was. I can remember a bunch of people covered us thanks to that. So this is the value of network. Um, that idea I didn't come up with that. That idea. Wouter, who was one of the community managers at the Dream It space where Naz was in class. He worked with Pete Sullivan, who's the CEO of Jack Pocket. By the way, we're doing a nice episode about him recently. Fantastic company. You should talk to that guy. Yeah, so Wouter was a great community manager, and he not as what we understand today as community manager, as just publishing on Facebook and answering comments. No, like he came up with some really amazing stuff to engage, to build a brand around their products. So he came up with that idea, like do posters around the world. Wouter was working with us from Sweden. We were in Chile. We were going to New York. So we were going to be all around the world for a little bit. We had that Easter Island trip planned. So the the idea was like, yeah, let's do these poster things. So yeah, we got some coverage from that because it obviously stands out, right? If you pitch somebody with a nice photo like that. Jordan Crook was who covered us from TechCrunch, I think.
Okay. And so early on, you mentioned how when Slidebean first came to be, it was kind of just a platform for anyone that needed to build a deck. But eventually you realized that it was startups and it was pitch decks that kind of ended up being your niche. And I'm curious how, kind of a two-pronged question with that. How did you come to that realization is that's who we should be focusing on with our marketing? And two, how long do you stay focused on one niche before you try and expand beyond that and get additional clients?
Good question. Yeah, very naively, we thought of Slidebean at first as a general presentation tool, right? Like this can work for anybody to make decks. And we pushed it to everybody. When we did Google search, we would target presentation software, PowerPoint alternatives, online presentation tools, like anybody looking for a presentation tool, like they can use us. And then when we started spending some money on ads there and really tracking how those people behaved, like we would track, okay, so people coming from this keyword, how are they behaving? Are they paying? Are they subscribing? Are they using the product? A lot of people were using the product. That was good, but very few of them were paying. The only ones that were really converting were the ones that we're coming from this particular keyword pitch deck. Um, so who searches Google for pitch deck related keywords? It's entrepreneurs. So whatever combination of things we had at that time, features, functionality, templates, whatever combination we had really resonated with these guys. And I remember that 8% or so of signups from the pitch deck keywords were converting into a paid account, which was insane compared to the other ones. Presentation software would convert below 1%. Why? Because it could be students, could be anybody, and the product was not focused. So for a long time, what we did is we started leveraging pitch deck. We doubled down on that keyword, but we continued to look to search for other keywords that would work out. Like what other audience can we target to? Now looking back, like that may be a contradiction, right? Because we're building. This is our main audience. They're the ones requesting features. We're delivering on those features, building features for them, but we're still trying to get this other audience that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Um, so luckily we realized soon enough that we just shouldn't just stop focusing on these guys and continue focusing on these guys, the startup audience. And that's what we have been doing ever since.
And so you have your target market now. You mentioned you raised a little bit of money. You got into 500 startups. And then in 2017, from my understanding, that was kind of the toughest year of Slidebean. I know you guys raised around a $500,000 round and you tried to grow aggressively. And I've heard that that aggressive growth led to some struggles with the company that year. I was wondering if you could elaborate on those.
Yeah, so we lived on this hockey stick startup story for a couple of years, right? So when we found that keyword and we found that model, and when we started growing really fast, like 20% month over month, we grew tremendously that year. 4 or 5x revenue, some crazy stuff like that. So we had raised an original 250K, and a year later we were doing so good. Raising some extra money was really easy. A lot of a lot of the investors that were on the verge the first time now realized, hey, these guys are growing pretty fast. So I think we raised an additional almost 600K. That brought up our total round, and we call all this a seed, like split into part seed. It's not really a Series A, 800 ish. Why? Because we were just riding the wave of this crazy growth, and raising money at that stage is easy, even if you're in Costa Rica. Um, the problem was we of course reinvested that money in our team and growing the company and so on. And at that same time, growth started slowing down. Um, the experiments that we did didn't work out. Like we weren't scaling as fast as we wanted to. Churn was an issue that we had overlooked. We had a huge amount of churn, probably above 10%. But since we were so good at generating leads and so good at bringing new conversions, churn was like a secondary problem, right? We're adding 12, $15,000 worth of MRR every month. Yeah, we're losing five, but who cares, right? Wrong, of course, but like that. What happens with churn is that you can continue growing really fast if you're good at generating leads, but there comes a point where your churn matches your new customers, and then you can't grow anymore. And we reached that after that second round. So we realized that we're going to have to do some experiments, some changes into the business model to see what we could do about churn. And that was the only time I've had to let people go because, and I hated that part because we had to let people go because we made the wrong decisions. And that's like a responsibility that you take as a CEO, right? If you hire someone, they're trusting you to make the right call and to continue growing the company. But we were wrong about who we hired, when we hired, and what marketing tactics we did, about a bunch of things. And yeah, that was, I think we had to let 3 or 4 people go just to extend our runway a little bit.
I have a quote here from you. I can't remember what this is from a podcast. I can't remember which one, but it says founders want to raise money before they're ready to raise money. I'm curious if you can want to elaborate on that quote, and two, if that's something you felt you had to do at that point in 2017 where you raised as much money as you did. Did you feel like you had to raise money then, or was it something you were doing because that was just what you thought was the next evolution of the startup?
Yeah, so and we see that a lot with our customers, right? Our customers in the end, they're using Slidebean to raise money, and it's the same mistake we fell into with potatoes. It's the same mistake we fell into with Slidebean at the very beginning, where thinking that we had a product, we had a few customers, we were making about $1,000 a month, thinking that that's enough to get an investor excited. So companies try to raise money at those early stages, and it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea because it's really hard. Investors usually, especially now, like back in the day, I think you needed a lot more money to start a company. You needed to buy some servers, right? You needed an infrastructure. Now you have AWS, and you probably can get some free credits anywhere. So you don't really need that much money from an infrastructure perspective. You need man hours. You need your team to work on this. And investors realize, and it obviously makes sense, that good teams can come up with stuff on their own. They can keep their day jobs. They can work on this at night. They can, and if they have the right team assembled, they can come up with a brand, a product, a landing page, basic mock-up. They can do that, and they don't need any money because they don't need to pay for any stuff. They're just using their own free time. Investors know this, so when a company comes to raise money with just an idea, that company is at a big disadvantage compared to the other entrepreneurs. So that I think is the problem, raising money too soon. I think that we raised money, like we tried to raise money at this stage in Slidebean and failed, which was also a huge waste of my time, because this is time that I'm spending meeting investors, building decks, instead of focusing on growth or whatever the business needs. So we raised money at the right time. We just were focusing on the wrong things, I suppose.
Have you had to raise money since, or was that round in 2017 your only round?
So that was a pivotal moment in the company, because we had to become profitable. We had to cut costs to extend the runway. We still have some cash in the bank, but we were growing slower because we were no longer spending so aggressively. So Series A. So what's a Series A? A Series A is a round that you raise when you have 1.5, $2 million in ARR. For a SaaS company, that's usually the case. Most investors won't talk to you unless you're above $1 million in ARR. And what did we have? We were below that. I think we were like 800K or something. We were below that. We had a huge churn problem that we weren't able to solve. We weren't growing as fast. We did not have Series A metrics, not by a chance. So, two things we could have done, but literally two things that and we sort of faced this decision. One is, man, we could fuel every money that we have into getting to Series A metrics, right? Lowering churn, even if that requires hiring people that we know their jobs are going to be at risk. Spending aggressively in marketing, seeing what happens, seeing if we can get back to 20% month-over-month growth. If we can do that, we can raise a Series A. Or we can, take the hit and survive and kind of regroup. And that's what we decided. Most companies don't do that. Like most Silicon Valley companies and most investors push company to plan A, which is, give it all you have. And if it fails, it fails. Because they're looking for that big win. They're looking for that big win. And if it's a medium win, it doesn't really work for them. So, go all in or don't go. Go big or go home. A combination of, knowing what our failed company felt like from a couple of years back, a combination from our investors in Costa Rica being, many of them being their first tech startup investment, right? I guess, I don't want for them to lose all their money as well. Like, I think a U.S. investor will understand that a company went down, and that's fine. It's part of the risk they assess. But many of my investors are first-time investors, so that's a bad experience that's going to leave a mark on me as an entrepreneur. So, for a combination of a bunch of different reasons, we chose Plan B, which was slowing down but becoming profitable, and we did. So our growth from 2017, which is when this happened, through 2018-19 was really slow because we were barely profitable. We had a good team that we had assembled. We had that team pivot on the product, pivot on the business model, understand what the company was all about, regroup, if you will, and then come up with something new. So that's what we've done through 2017, 18, 19. Slidebean was pretty much under the radar. We had some customers, we had some slow growth, but there was nothing really going on. It was only like it took us those 2 years of reassessing to kind of find out like, oh, maybe we can do this. And that's kind of what has brought us back into the spotlight.
And a big part of that has been the awesome content marketing job you guys have been doing. And you as a CEO, I've heard you say that you kind of, despite being the CEO, you spend a lot of time with the marketing team. I'm curious why you kind of skew in that direction.
Yeah, I think that it relates to, I think that the CEO needs to be there for what the company needs. Um, None of us three co-founders had a marketing background. Mine with potatoes, which was kind of a little bit of luck and a little bit of growth hacking, guerrilla marketing kind of thing. That's the only marketing background that Slidebean had when we started out. But even considering that, like I was quote unquote the most experienced marketer in the founding team. So we sort of had to take tasks on our own, right? Jose and Vini started focusing a lot more on the product, on the UX, on the design, on the results of the presentations, and somebody had to do marketing. So I had to do that. Like we all had to do support, we all had to do onboarding. I had to do sales at some point because I think the role of a CEO needs to be that versatile. Like you need to move from the different stuff that the company needs. And I ended up landing in marketing. I guess that not so bad at it if we've come up with some decent stuff. And I've surrounded myself by a fantastic team. But I still lead that part. And it was only until we had some money again to spare where we figured like, okay, so we need to hire somebody smarter than to lead this stuff. And that's what we've started doing recently.
And your mindset when it comes to marketing is something I really like. A lot of people view marketing as an expense, but you view it as an investment. I was wondering if you could explain why you look at it that way.
Yeah, that, two things about that, and my perspective about this is changing so much. But in the early stages of Slidebean, most of our marketing was what we call now direct marketing, direct response marketing, which means we spent $1,000 in Google Ads, and we expect to get a couple thousand back from the customers that convert through that. That's direct response marketing. It's marketing that where you pay money and you get money in return. And a lot of early stage companies, a lot of tech startups, uh, rely so heavily on direct marketing because it can get you to millions of dollars of revenue. I see companies that make 10, 20 million, $30 million, and most of their uh, revenue comes from their marketing. So direct response. They become really, really good at squeezing every possible margin out of those ads that they're running. And that's great. And we did that for the longest time. Like that's how we got to enough revenue to become profitable. But then we started discovering this brand thing. And by the way, on that part, like marketing is an investment, and it's a very obvious investment. You spend 1,000, and if you're tracking it well, you know that you made 1,000 back. So it's a no-brainer to spend 2,000 to get 4,000 back, and you can just continue repeating on that. It was only more recently that we discovered what we now understand as the power of brand. We always thought of brand awareness, like our brand awareness budget, as a subsection of our marketing where we'd spend 80% of our budget on direct response, stuff that directly generates revenue, and 20% on brand, stuff that's intangible, t-shirts, social media for the most part, just stuff that gets our brand out there. Why? Because we can't really track if that works or not, right? Like we can't spend all our money on that because we wouldn't know if it's working. Um, it was only more recently, and especially thanks to the success we've had on YouTube, that we've started to discover the power of brand. Why? Because when you establish a good brand, you start getting people to talk about you. You start getting people to recommend your product. You start becoming part of the people's top of mind. Um, you start Brand starts creating people to make irrational decisions about your brand. Um, People love the brand and they want to be part of this product just because they love the brand, not because the product is necessarily better or because it's cheaper. For whatever reason, they just trust this brand and they want to be a part of it. And that's a very rational thing that we only started to really tap into. But obviously, any other major brand in the world knows how that works. So brand, yes, brand is harder to track. Uh, it is an investment, yes, but it's also an expense. It's more arguably an expense because you don't really know if the return's going to be there.
So I'm curious, as an early stage startup, what element of marketing should you focus on? Should you do similar to what you guys are doing in the beginning and do kind of an 80-20 split, or should it be a little bit more to a 50-50? Like, how would you do that if you were starting over again?
I think I would still go with that 80-20 split, because those direct response customers will teach you a lot. First, you can get them very quickly. If you're doing, I don't know, if you do ads on Google, or if you pay a sponsorship to go to host a booth in conference, you can track the ROI very directly, like how much revenue did this generate. But most importantly, those early customers are going to are going to give you knowledge about your product, about what the product needs to be, about why they're buying, right? So I think an early stage company should focus on that much more than brand. Brand is more intangible, brand takes longer, and usually early stage companies have a year to make it or break it, right? So you don't have time to build brand in a year. You have time to get customers. So do what you can to do that. So I think I'd still follow that same approach. Maybe start investing in brand earlier, because I understand how much it's worth now.
Okay. And I kind of, you mentioned how YouTube has been a really big unlock for you guys. And I'm curious if we can dive into that as well, because it's not like you all of a sudden made the decision to do YouTube and it worked. Like you guys worked at it over the last couple of years to try and get it to work, just throwing different content ideas at the wall to see what sticks. One of my personal favorites is a video you did where you took a shot of Jägermeister after every minute you talked in a video. But I'm curious as to if you could kind of contextualize how long you guys worked at YouTube before you really started to see it work, and what was it that allowed it? What did you throw at the wall that finally stuck with your YouTube content?
Um, yeah, so we did a bunch of things on YouTube. Like our first big breakthrough on organic, or not paid, but organic, was SEO. So we started generating all
Mhm.
our content around pitch decks. That started generating traffic, and we reached number two, number three position in a lot of keywords related to pitch deck, and that we built Slidebean on the backbone of that. Most of our early customers, came from that. But then we ran out of Google searches. Like there weren't any more people looking for pitch decks. So how do we target these guys? We figured video could be an option. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. So yeah, we did a sitcom series. We did a bunch of episodes that like a shorter form episodes on opinions around stuff around design. None of that stuff stuck. What started to stick was, one of the things that made our blog successful was that we were fairly transparent about stuff. Like we have an article on how we spent the first $20,000, $250,000 that we raised. We had an article on how we built this SEO engine and how much it cost us to build it. We had an article on how we almost ran out of business. We had to pivot. So people really connected with this content because it was honest. It was coming from a position of experience and with the numbers that were necessary to provide context to it. So once we figured that, can we translate this content into a video format? That's what started working out. If you look at early videos, the format sucks, but it still has an essence of what becomes. We didn't have a green screen. We used like a white background that kind of cropped into the frame. It was terrible, but we had the animation, which we did. We felt like, how do we stand out a little bit? We're a design company. One of the experiments we did at that time was sponsors and podcasts, and that didn't work out because I think we were trying to push a design related product in a medium that does not have any visual aid, right? So that didn't work out, but we tested. But with YouTube, we had that balance of, we can share a glimpse of our quality as designers through the production and the animation, and we can still share these stories. I think the combination of those two was the backbone of our first YouTube breakthrough.
Mhm. And I think the thing that trips up a lot of people when it comes to content marketing is that sometimes that content doesn't directly involve your product. Like after going through your YouTube, your top videos are videos about other companies. I found your forensic files, those deep dives, those are the videos that perform the best on average compared to everything else. And I'm curious if that was something you guys struggled with in the beginning, was finding that balance of wanting to talk and promote Slidebean, but also realizing that this type of content is what's working.
Yeah, so the first videos, the first 30,000 subscribers that we got on YouTube came from our blog to video conversions, right? Articles that we wrote and we put in video format, and they worked pretty well. They were also targeting searches, so we were targeting the same searches that we were targeting on Google. We were targeting those searches on YouTube, and we built an original audience based on that. What we realized at some point was, like, there's only so many people searching for convertible notes or searching for how to build a pitch deck. Some entrepreneurs know how to do that and they don't need to search for it. So how do we get in front of them? How else can we get our brand in front of them? So YouTube through all this process was a direct response campaign for us. The cost of producing a video, the time, the salaries, we did all this stuff in house, but the time that we took to produce this video, um, it was all accounted for in the balance of, okay, how many paid customers did we get from this? And it was working out. It was a good direct response. But once we realized the power of YouTube, once we realized that people were finding us, subscribing to our content, becoming passionate about the brand, we figured like maybe we can reach more people, but the content needs to be more broad. And that's when we came up with this company forensic series. It was around the WeWork was the first feature that we did. It was around the time that WeWork was really struggling with the CEO leaving and the mess that they made. I wrote the first story. I don't write them anymore. We have a team that writes them, but I wrote that first WeWork episode, and we shot it, and it did crazy well, right? Because it was a combination of these two things: tech and a story that a lot of people could relate to. So WeWork is like the perfect balance of the two, because who knows about WeWork? Entrepreneurs, founders, like they have their WeWork office, right? So if they are the ones that want to hear the story of why WeWork is failing. Now we've expanded that into other companies that are not around the startup world, and company forensics has sort of become like a gateway drug to our YouTube channel. Like if the first 30K subscribers came from like really focused startup content, the next 170, we just reached 200K. The next 170 came from this broader content around company forensics. And some of those guys discover us, see my face for the first time, and some of them will eventually like start knowing what this brand is all about. A lot of them aren't our customers. A lot of them are not entrepreneurs. They're not founders. They're not going to need a pitch deck in many, many years. But they have sort of connected with our brand. And that's this new power that we discovered.
So I'm curious if you can kind of tell me where Slidebean is today. You said 2017, 18, 19 was a little bit slower. Obviously, you've had to adapt to COVID, of course. So I'm curious where the company's at today.
Yeah, so for us, it was a big struggle to realize that our first idea had, in a way, failed. Our first idea was we're going to revolutionize presentations. We're going to let anybody make beautifully designed presentations and save time. We can't do that. Like we realized that can't be done. We can't compete with Microsoft. Google has done some good job to catch up to PowerPoint, and all of these tools are free or almost free. Like everybody gets Google Slides for free. So who would pay for another tool unless they see the value? Like we realized that we just can't win in this game. I think companies like Prezi, for example, who was a pioneer in the presentation space, are also struggling a little bit with scale. Like they haven't been able to, they're in this middle ground where I'm sure they're not growing very fast. They haven't raised money in a while. They're not ready for an IPO because there's only so much you can do when you're competing against Microsoft and Google, who offer things for free, and also the tool and the interface that everybody knows. So we had to accept that and sort of give up and say we were wrong. We thought we could do it, but we couldn't. Let's accept that and do something else. And that's what Slidebean is going for, and what we've gone through for this past 6 months, maybe understanding that and saying, okay, so first premise was wrong, but we discovered that we were really, really good at marketing to entrepreneurs and founders and yeah, people who are interested in entrepreneurship. What can we do with this skill and with stuff that we have now? And what we've done is we've come up with new products that we know that these companies need. Some of them have failed. Some of them we've done like video experiments, see if people catch on to it, and if we don't see a lot of traction, we'll just shut it down. And we're able to do these experiments, and we're able to pay for these experiments ourselves. And the latest one, which is a platform that we're calling Monthly. By the way, we learned with Slidebean that Slidebean is kind of hard to pronounce. People get it wrong sometimes. So we really strive to find a pronounceable, easy to remember name. So that's why we went with Monthly. So Monthly is a SaaS tracking tool. So we know these guys need it. We know that we can sell it to them. We know that our channel, our content is great. We know that they're in our audience already. We just have to push this new product to them. And one thing I get asked sometimes is like, why don't you just start a new company? Why don't you just close Slidebean, sell Slidebean, and then just start it? And my answer to that is, well, this company can't really start without Slidebean. This new product that sells to these to these same people, like if we started from scratch, we wouldn't necessarily have the credibility or the audience. We would have to start from scratch, and we don't. Like we think that the value that we have in this audience gives us a significant advantage against anybody starting something similar. So that's where Slidebean is now. It's been a wild ride, but I think we're very excited about what we can do now. With we have this superpower that is we have an audience and we're profitable. So we can, and our investors are cool with us exploring these new things. So this is a unique position to be in where we can come up with new products. We have a budget for them. We have very little risk because it's all paid up by the profit that we generate from Slidebean. And it's a lovely entrepreneurial place to be in. Like another founder would, and I get this conversation sometimes, like, you've been with this company 7 years, like, aren't you bored? And don't you want to explore some other things? Well, yes, but I'm a dad, and I've enjoyed the comfort, and I sleep well at night because I have a profitable company. What better position to be in than using that platform to launch other things?
And you mentioned how it's been a wild ride. And I'm curious, do you ever reflect on that wild ride from that guy who was first exposed to the startup world through the social network, to the craziness with potatoes, to the early days of Slidebean, where you're manually converting files to PDF, all the way to where you are today? Do you ever reflect on that whole journey?
Man, usually I don't have time. Like, honestly, this interview has been the first reflection I've made in a while, but I very much appreciate it. It's been it's fun to remember. Like, sometimes we just don't have the time. Um, I don't know. Like, if anybody's listening all the way up to this point, I guess that the story is interesting enough to keep listening to it. I never know if it's interesting enough. Um, yeah, man. Like, I like to think that I'm still young. I like to think that this experience is gonna be useful for future companies. Um, I think that one other variable that has sort of resonated with a lot of our audience is that I'm a bit of a foreigner to, not a bit, a complete foreigner to this world. Not born in the U.S., not a native U.S. English speaker. No idea what startups were until like 7, 8 years ago. Um, so we're all sort of outsiders, and a lot of other outsider entrepreneurs, either minority or coming foreign entrepreneurs who were not originally based in the Valley or in the U.S. at all. I've sort of connected with our story, and I'm really happy about that because um, it is harder to start a company if you don't have the network, if you don't have the soft landing, if you've never been to New York or San Francisco. Um, but I had to catch up with that a little bit. But now that I have, I think that hopefully in the next 10 or 20 years, I can come up with some other cool stuff.
Mhm. And we're running out of time here. So I'm going to jump to the last question that I ask every guest before the end of every podcast. So imagine you have this crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question, you'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you'd want to know the answer to?
Wow, that's a good. Let me think. Let me think for a sec. Um, I would ask, like, uh, yeah, like, in the end, I would ask, like, time is. I think it's about time. Like, you only have so much time in your life to do things, right? We get like 50 good years to produce things as human beings. um like, every day is, and I have to quote NASA on this. Like, he has this t-shirt with the 30% or 35% life bar loading bar thing. Like, as an entrepreneur, when you have so many ideas, when you have the power in your hands to create things, to create products and services that in one way or the other, impact people's lives. Like, I always want to know, like, if this is the most impactful thing that I can be doing. Like, I think that we're doing some cool stuff. We heard this quote from our team the other day. Is we're selling to people's dreams. Like, these are people starting companies of their own, and we're there in that journey. So I think that that's a fantastic thing because we can get to impact them, and they get to impact other people, and that's really, really cool. But I wonder if that is the best way to. And I'm not meaning this in a philanthropical kind of way. I'm meaning this in creating a service or product that changes the way people do something. Um, and that's I think that what we all want to do as entrepreneurs. If I had to ask the question, it'd be, is this the best way to do it, or should I be doing something else?
I love that question, but I want to thank you so much for taking time to be in this podcast. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you, plug anything and everything you got right now?
Yeah, so find me on Twitter. I'm Kaya here, so Caya here. Jacob, this has been man. Thanks a lot for for the interview. It's brought me on a good trip down memory lane. Thanks for doing all the good research. I didn't know so much content about this was out there, but it was really fun. I look forward to hearing this again, sharing it around. It's been a blast this hour. I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Kaya, for taking the time to be on this podcast. And thank you to everybody for listening. Whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces, I really appreciate you taking the time to check this out. Everyone, go and do me a big favor. Go and follow Kaya on Twitter, on Instagram. Go and check out Slidebean. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. And if you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. If you'd like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at My Social Life Podcast or YouTube by searching up My Social Life. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.